Hare Krishna, my humble obeisances to those of you who are watching. All glories to Srila Prabhupada. In this quick video, I'm going to respond to a devotee who asks me the following question when in a post that I made on Facebook, where I post the picture of Parabhakti Prabhu, a devotee I respect, I admire, I always found to be very kind to me since 30 years, and who is the temple president of ISKCON Villa Vrindavan, goes to the Vatican, as you can see here. And if you look at the actual picture, you'll see him dressed in his traditional Indian, North Indian dhoti, Middle Eastern kurta, and so on. And so, as you can see here, this devotee, Robert Butler, I don't know what his initiated name, says, curious why a person's chosen dress is important to you. Isn't it the substance of their heart and character that matters most? Right. Now, here's my answer. Obviously, I understand that the substance of someone's consciousness is what counts. But what devotees seem to sometimes fail to understand is I'm concerned, as they are, with the preaching mission, with expanding the Sankirtan movement in the most efficient and powerful way in the modern Western world. After all, we pray to Prabhupada, Paschatya Desha Tarine, pranam mantra that he himself wrote. Namaste Saraswati Deve Gauravani Pracharine Nirvishesh Shunyavadi Paschatya Desha Tarine. He who is spreading the teachings of Lord Chaitanya in the Western country. Paschatya Desh. Desh means land, and Paschatya, Western. If you go to the West today and you look at our temples, you'll see very clearly that 99% of our temples have been subsumed within the Indian diaspora. Again, I'm not bashing any Indians here or any souls in Indian bodies. I'm not doing any sort of racist comment here. Any soul who comes to Krishna consciousness is glorious. I repeat it again and again and again. And whether they have Indian bodies or white bodies or black bodies or Latino bodies or whatever, or animal bodies, if they're using their free will to chant the holy name and to try to surrender to Krishna, they are glorious. However, there is a consideration, and that is the consideration of demographics and strategy. For example, in America, and I'm just saying this quickly as an introduction to go to this picture of Parabhakti and to answer the question of Robert Butler. Robert Prabhu, I'm sorry, I don't have the time to click. I don't even know if you signed your name anywhere. So, in the USA, because that's what I know quite well in terms of the demographics, that means, who makes up what? Out of the, 33 million people, if I'm not mistaken, who live, 300, anyway, what's the population of America? Out of the whole population of America, only about 2% of the population is Indian. And that includes Muslim Indians, Hindu Indians, Sikh Indians, you name it. So the Vaishnavas within that little percentage are very, very small. If all our ISKCON temples are only spreading within the Indian diaspora, and only a tiny fraction of the entire population, namely the whites who are the majority in America, and then, blacks and Latinos, and then smaller minorities like the Asians, for example, those from Chinese, Korean, Japanese, Vietnamese descent, are only a fraction of what we see at every Sunday feast or at every Sadhu Sangha festival and so on, then we have a very serious problem. So that's one point. Now, to address Robert Prabhu's question, curious why a person's chosen dress is important to you. It's important to me because one thing you should know, Robert Prabhu, is that body language preaches a whole lot. Body language is huge. What we say in our non-verbal language is monumental. Now, before I continue on this point, allow me to add another thing which I hope you understand and agree with. The more we raise the bar in terms of presenting the product of Krishna consciousness to a Western audience, do you agree that the harder it is for that audience or members of that audience to come to Krishna consciousness? Bhakti Charu Swami, my Diksha Guru, used to often quote Prabhupada, I didn't do the research to see where it was quoted, but hopefully he did say that. And it makes perfect sense that he said that, because it totally falls in line with, basic sociology and psychology of religion. Namely, that if I had only asked devotees or people to follow 3 regulative principles, I would have millions of followers. Something to that effect, Prabhupada allegedly had said. Like if he had dropped one of the 4 regulative principles, if he had brought the bar down, then obviously there would be a lot more people coming, because who wants to, have sex only for, within marriage and ideally for procreation? Who wants to be only vegetarian? Who wants to never ever take any intoxicants? Conditioned souls are bound to engage in sense gratification. So the more they can be religious and at the same time get their sense gratification, the more clients you have, right? And conversely, the more restrictions you impose on them, the more people you filter out to, buy your product. Now, these 4 regulative principles are non-negotiable. They're non-negotiable. However, if you raise the bar even a milligram above the foundational, non-negotiable requirements for practicing serious bhakti yoga, then you're crazy. You're insane. You're insane. You are insane. You're doing a disservice to the mission. So now finally, coming to this point, I believe, I may be wrong, but I believe from everything I've studied, from Shastra, from Prabhupada's statements on dress code, from the history, from the visual sartorial history of how Vaishnavas, especially, I'm speaking about grihastas here, okay? Men who are not, monks. I'm not talking about sannyasis and brahmacharis, who have always anyway constituted an important but minority, tiny little vein next to the main artery of the Vaishnava community in terms of demographics. Because again, if you can be Krishna conscious and be married and have a family life, most people go in that, with that option. So it's always been the case that the monastic type has always been a very small minority compared in terms of numbers to the larger number of people who practice Krishna consciousness and who are householders. So putting aside the brahmacharis and the monks, the householders have no religious uniform. Vaishnava grihastas, all right, have never had a mandatory religious uniform. What to speak of a mandatory religious uniform that is radically different from how people in the, let's say, host culture or greater culture dress. And I could argue that until the cows come home. There is no scriptural reference to a specific Vaishnava dress uniform. There's mention of tilak, which I don't have because I just took a shower, sorry. There's mention of tulsi beads. Rupa Goswami mentions those 2 things and only those 2 things, namely tilak and tulsi beads. He never mentions, in his Bhakti Rasamrita Sindhu, dhotis, saris, kurtas, shikas, right? He only mentions tilak and tulsi. So if there's any external symbol that really belongs to Vaishnavism and that nobody else on planet Earth except Vaishnavas show and wear, it's tulsi and tilak. Dhotis, saris, Muslim or Middle Eastern kurtas, and shikas are not an exclusive Vaishnava dress. They are some sort of, Hindu, you want to call it greater Vedic, fine. It's not a Vaishnava dress. It's not a dress that defines the Vaishnava regardless of ashram and varna. For example, like, the typical dress of a Amish in the United States, or a Mennonite, or a Sikh in Punjab with the turban and the beard, and so regardless whether he's a guru or a taxi driver or an architect or a businessman, the Sikh of today, from the Khalsa, which was established under Guru Gobind Singh, because before that they didn't have any religious uniform. The Sikh who has those 5 things, like the turban, the metal, the silver bracelet, the beard, the little dagger, there's 5 things. That nobody else on the planet has those specific combination of external symbols except the Sikh. So we can definitely talk about a Sikh uniform. However, a dhoti, a Muslim kurta, even a shika, a sari is not something that Vaishnavas and only Vaishnavas are wearing and have worn, right? So now, in the West, finally coming to Robert Butler, Prabhu Robert's question. In the West, what is easier in terms of just going with the flow? And when I say I'm going with the flow, I'm not saying succumbing to sinful life and breaking the regulative principles. I'm just talking in terms of interaction with society at large, especially if you're a grihasta. So, getting a job, getting a position in society, what will people think of you? Just basic functioning within a greater mainstream society in the West today. What is easier? A North Indian Bengali dress like we see Parabhakti wearing here right now? Or just a regular pair of trousers and shirt and whatever, sports jacket, Nike shoes, clean, modest, that you buy in any store? What's easier? Which raises the bar? So, why am I concerned? Because someone like Parabhakti Prabhu or like Mahatma, I don't want to go down the list of all the Grihasta leaders, but they're basically all culprits in this regard, okay? And I say this, with all the respect that I have for their bhakti to Krishna, for their exemplary sadhana, for their qualification as, GBCs or Diksha Gurus or Shiksha Gurus. I'm not, putting into question any of that. But I am, in my opinion, pointing out one place where they are making a tremendous mistake in terms of the results of our preaching. And this is it, raising the bar by their body language and therefore telling everybody in Italy, telling everybody in France, telling everybody in Germany, telling everybody in America, look at me. I'm a senior member of the Hare Krishna movement. I have a managerial position or a leadership position, and look how I'm dressed. Not only am I wearing the exclusive Vaishnava symbol of tilak and tulsi, and for that, hey, kudos. I'll never say don't wear it. I mean, I'll say, yeah, maybe in some circumstances don't wear it, but if someone says, no, I want to die on the hill wearing tilak and tulsi in the West all the time, I'll be like, hey, I'm not going to say anything. Because it's an exclusive, because you're representing Vaishnavism. But when you're wearing a dhoti, a kurta, a shika and a sari, you're not representing Vaishnavism. You're just representing the greater cultural context into which Vaishnavism, and I'm not into representing anything but or less than Vaishnavism. I didn't sign up in ISKCON, and I don't think anyone signed up in ISKCON or in, the Sankirtan movement to represent external Indian culture, external Hindu North Indian culture. That's not what we're about. We're about representing Radha and Krishna and the process to achieve love of Radha and Krishna, right? And if there are any symbolic representations that are exclusive to our tradition, like tilak and tulsi, fine, wear them. But when you're dressed, like we see Parabhakti dressing here, we're telling the world in the West, hey, when you become a serious practitioner of Bhakti Yoga, not only do you have to follow the 4 regulative principles, non-negotiables, agreed, but on top of that, you can't even use your clean Western clothes to represent. Those Western clothes, and therefore the culture that they represent, is too profane, too fallen. You have to let that go, abandon it, and dress like a generic person of North India or Bangladesh. And only in that uniform or that style of dress can you, access Krishna and then represent him with, some priest at the Pope's funeral, right? And that's why and so you're raising the bar. And every time you raise that bar unnecessarily, you're losing out on customers. And what do these customers represent? Who are these customers? They're souls, conditioned souls like you, like me, who are bereft of Lord Chaitanya's mercy, and who, if the Bhagavad Gita is correct, are going to have to take birth again and again and again in the material world for X number of births to come. Unnecessary suffering, unnecessary time spent rotting away in the samsara cycle. So if that's not violence, I don't know what is. And so if you have the heart of a preacher and you see some preacher using a strategy that for the large majority of potential customers are going to filter them out, because again, what's easier? As I asked the question before, then of course you're concerned. Of course you're concerned. So that's my answer, Robert. That's my answer. It's not about me. It's not about my likes or dislikes. It's about the mission. And it's about tweaking, like when you publish a YouTube video, and I'll finish with this. When you publish a YouTube video, you look at the analytics after. And you see, wow, people dropped off at this point and that. My click-through rate wasn't that great. Oh, they like this point. So you tweak your next video so that your click-through rate will be higher, so that, attention, like time retention or audience retention will be greater. So in the similar way, a preacher and an institution tweaks, that's where the whole principle of principles and details. You adjust the details based on the principles, anchored to the rock, geared to the times. So if you do things that you don't have to, but that time and time again will drive away even one soul, what to speak of hundreds, what to speak of thousands, right? Then you're not being compassionate. So that's my answer. Why a devotee's chosen dress is important to you. That's why it's important. Because of the salvation of the maximum number of souls. So I hope that makes sense. Hare Krishna. Thanks for listening. All glories to Prabhupada.